The day my own son asked me to leave my own house, I finally understood that some people don't stop seeing you as family. They start seeing you as something they can use. I was sitting on the sofa, folding clean towels, enjoying the quiet afternoon. It was one of those peaceful moments that don't last very long. Then I heard heavy footsteps. A second later, my son Ethan walked into the living room. His face looked serious, almost cold. Right behind him came his wife, Vanessa. Her arms were crossed, and she wore a smile that never reached her eyes. For a moment, I simply looked at them. This was my home. I had lived here for more than 30 years. Every wall held a memory. Every room reminded me of my late husband. Yet somehow, the two people standing in front of me made me feel like I was the visitor. Ethan didn't sit down. He stayed standing, like someone who had already made his decision before entering the room. "Mom," he said in a calm voice, "you need to listen carefully." I put the towel on my lap and waited. Vanessa stepped closer without saying a word. Then Ethan took a deep breath. "Vanessa owes $500,000. We need your help. Either you pay the debt, or you move out." His words were so calm that they almost sounded normal. For a second, I wondered if I had heard him correctly. Move out? From my own house? Before I could answer, Vanessa gave a small laugh. "I really don't understand why you're still holding on to this place," she said. "You can't keep it forever." I looked at her, speechless. She continued as if she were giving friendly advice. "One day it'll belong to Ethan anyway. Why make things difficult? Just help us and stop being selfish." Selfish. That word hurt more than the amount of money they were asking for. I wasn't upset because they wanted help. I was hurt because they believed they had the right to demand it. Ethan sighed impatiently. "Mom, don't act like the victim. You're only living here because we've been patient." Patient. I almost smiled at how strange that sounded. This was the same house where I had raised him, the same kitchen where I packed his school lunches every morning, the same hallway where I measured his height every birthday, the same bedroom where I stayed awake all night whenever he had a fever. Now he was talking as if I was staying here because of his kindness. I looked around the room. The old family pictures were still hanging on the wall. My husband's favorite chair still sat beside the window. Nothing had changed, except the people inside the house. I wanted to argue. I wanted to remind Ethan about everything I had sacrificed for him. The extra jobs, the missed vacations, the dreams I had quietly given up so he could have a better future. But I already knew it wouldn't matter. People only listen when they want the truth. And neither Ethan nor Vanessa had come to hear mine. They had already decided what kind of person I was. Vanessa finally sat down, making herself comfortable. "We're really not asking for much," she said. "Honestly, you should appreciate that we've let you stay here this long." Those words stayed with me, not because they were true, because they showed how deeply things had changed. Somewhere along the way, gratitude had turned into control, respect had turned into pressure, and family had become a business deal. Ethan checked his watch. "So," he asked, "what's your answer?" His voice wasn't emotional. It wasn't hopeful. It sounded like a manager waiting for an employee to sign paperwork. I stayed quiet. Not because I didn't know what to say, because I suddenly realized this conversation wasn't about money. It wasn't even about Vanessa's debt. It was about power. If I gave them the money today, there would be another demand tomorrow. If I gave up one piece of my life, they would expect the next one just as easily. This wasn't the beginning. It was simply the first time they had stopped hiding what they really wanted. I slowly nodded, not because I agreed, because I wanted them to believe I had accepted defeat. The relief on Ethan's face appeared almost instantly. "I knew you'd understand," he said. Vanessa smiled proudly. "We'll prepare everything tomorrow." Everything. The word echoed in my mind. They thought tomorrow would be the day I handed over my future. What they didn't know was that tomorrow would be the day everything started changing. That evening, after they walked upstairs, I remained alone in the living room. The folded towels were still beside me. Nothing looked different. But deep inside, I knew my life had already taken a path they couldn't imagine. And they were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. But before I tell you what I did next, you need to understand how my own son slowly became a stranger. Because this story didn't begin with that terrible demand. It started years earlier, with one simple word that I refused to say. Yes. People often think families fall apart because of one big fight. The truth is much quieter than that. Most families break apart one small moment at a time. A little disappointment here, a little resentment there. Before anyone notices, love slowly turns into blame. Looking back now, I can clearly see where everything started. It happened almost 15 years before Ethan demanded my house. He was 22 years old, full of confidence and big dreams. One Saturday morning, he came to see me, carrying a folder packed with papers. His face was glowing with excitement. "Mom," he said, "this is going to change our lives." I smiled and invited him to sit down. For nearly an hour, he explained his business idea. At least, he tried to. Every few minutes, the plans seemed to change. One moment, he wanted to open a company. The next, he wanted to invest in someone else's project. Then he started talking about quick profits and guaranteed success. The more he explained, the less I understood. When he finally finished, he looked at me with hopeful eyes. "I just need one thing." I already knew what was coming. "I need you to invest your savings." He named the amount. It was almost everything I had spent years putting away. Money I had earned by working overtime. Money meant for my retirement. Money my late husband and I had carefully saved together. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked him simple questions. Who would manage the business? What experience did they have? What would happen if things went wrong? Every answer felt uncertain. Nothing sounded planned. It all depended on hope. I loved my son more than anything. But love isn't the same as blind trust. Finally, I looked at him and spoke as gently as I could. "Ethan, I believe in you, but I can't risk my retirement on something that isn't ready." For a moment, he simply stared at me. Then his smile disappeared. "So, you don't believe in me?" His words caught me by surprise. "That's not what I said." It is exactly what you said. His voice became louder. If you trusted me, you'd help me. I tried explaining that believing in someone didn't mean agreeing with every decision they made. But he wasn't listening anymore. To him, my answer wasn't careful. It was betrayal. He left my house angry that afternoon. For weeks, he barely answered my phone calls. Then I started hearing things from relatives. Ethan says you crushed his dream. He told us you care more about money than your own son. You should have supported him. Nobody asked why I had refused. Nobody wanted to hear my side. Months later, the business failed before it even opened. Several people who had invested their money lost almost everything. One of Ethan's friends had to sell his car. Another borrowed money just to pay rent. When I heard the news, I didn't feel happy. I felt relieved. Not because Ethan had failed, because I hadn't allowed him to take my future down with him. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Something changed inside Ethan after that. Every time I disagreed with him, he remembered that first no. Every boundary I set became another reason for him to believe I didn't support him. Years passed. He eventually recovered financially and found a stable job. I hoped life had taught him an important lesson. Instead, it seemed to teach him something else. He started believing that anyone who questioned him was standing in his way. Then one day, he introduced me to the woman he wanted to marry. Vanessa walked into my house carrying expensive handbags, designer shoes, and enough confidence to fill every room. She was friendly, very friendly, almost too friendly. She complimented everything she saw, my curtains, my garden, even the old clock hanging in the hallway. It felt rehearsed. Still, I welcomed her kindly. I wanted Ethan to be happy. Over the next few months, we met many times. I listened more than I spoke, and little by little, I noticed small things that made me uncomfortable. Vanessa loved talking about expensive vacations, luxury cars, designer clothes, big houses. But whenever someone asked how she paid for those things, she quickly changed the subject. One evening during dinner, she proudly showed us pictures of a brand new sports car. It was impossible to say no, she laughed. It was worth every penny. I smiled politely. It's beautiful, I said. I just hope it doesn't become a heavy financial burden. That was all I said. One simple sentence. Nothing rude, nothing insulting. But Vanessa's smile disappeared. She laughed awkwardly and changed the subject. Later that night, Ethan called me. You embarrassed her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I complimented the car. You judged her. I simply said it was expensive. Exactly. That conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, but it marked the beginning of something much bigger. From that day forward, Vanessa stopped seeing me as Ethan's mother. She started seeing me as someone standing between them and the life they wanted. And before long, she found a way to make Ethan see me the same way. I thought refusing money had created the distance between us. I had no idea the next request they would make wouldn't be about cash at all. It would be about something far more valuable than money. As time went by, I stopped trying to convince Ethan that I meant well. Every conversation seemed to end the same way. If I agreed with him, everything was fine. If I questioned him, I became the problem. After he married Vanessa, things changed even faster. At first, they only visited on weekends. Then it became several times a week. Soon after, they asked if they could stay just for a little while. Their apartment lease was ending, and they said they needed a few months to save money before buying a home. It sounded reasonable. After all, Ethan was my son. Of course I wanted to help. I welcomed them into my house with open arms. I believed they would treat it with the same respect I always had. For the first few weeks, everything felt normal. We shared dinners, we laughed together. Sometimes I even believed I had worried for nothing. But little by little, the atmosphere inside the house began to change. Vanessa started making decisions without asking me. She rearranged furniture because she thought it looked better. She replaced family photos with modern decorations. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and noticed a picture of my late husband had disappeared. I searched the shelves until I finally found it inside a storage box in the garage. When I asked Vanessa about it, she smiled. I was just updating the room. Updating. That single word hurt more than she probably realized. To her, it was just another decoration. To me, it was 35 years of memories. I quietly placed the picture back where it belonged. She didn't argue, but I noticed the look she gave me. It wasn't anger. It was annoyance. As if I had interrupted her plans. A few weeks later, Ethan brought up another subject during dinner. "Mom," he said casually, "I've been thinking about the house." I looked up from my plate. "What about it?" "I talked to a friend who works in real estate." I nodded, waiting. "He said it might be smart to put my name on the property." I frowned. "Why?" "It could make paperwork easier later." Vanessa quickly joined the conversation. "And it would save everyone a lot of trouble in the future." Everything about their explanation sounded too smooth, too prepared. They made it seem like a simple favor, just a signature, nothing more. Still, something inside me felt uneasy. "I'd like to speak with my lawyer first," I replied. The room became quiet. Vanessa's smile faded for only a second before returning. "Of course," she said sweetly. "We're only trying to help." The next morning, I met with my lawyer. He carefully listened while I explained everything. Then he looked directly at me. "Don't sign anything." I blinked. "Why?" "Because once another person's name is added to your property, your rights can change in ways most people don't expect." He explained every possibility. Some were small, others could completely change ownership in the future. When I left his office, I already knew my answer. That evening, Ethan asked what the lawyer had said. "I've decided to keep the house in my own name." His face immediately tightened. "You don't trust me?" I sighed quietly. "This isn't about trust." "Then what is it about?" "It's about protecting something your father and I worked our whole lives to build." Vanessa pushed her chair back. "So we're good enough to live here, but not good enough to share ownership?" I looked at her calmly. Living here and owning this home are two different things. She laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. "I think you're afraid of letting go." "No," I answered softly. "I'm simply being careful." Neither of them spoke for the rest of dinner. Later that night, I overheard voices upstairs. They thought I was asleep. Vanessa sounded frustrated. "She'll never give us anything." Ethan answered with a tired voice. I know. We'll have to find another way. Those words stayed with me long after the house became quiet. Another way. I didn't know exactly what she meant, but I had a feeling it wasn't anything good. From that day forward, I noticed small changes everywhere. Family members who rarely called suddenly stopped calling completely. Relatives became distant. People I had known for years looked at me differently during family gatherings. It was as if someone had quietly rewritten my story while I wasn't looking.
Eventually, I discovered why. Vanessa had been telling everyone that I didn't trust my own son, that I cared more about my house than my family, that I planned to leave Ethan with nothing. Very few people ever asked if those stories were true. Most simply believed what was easier. Because it's much simpler to call someone selfish than to admit they're protecting themselves. Looking back now, I realize something important. The house was never their real goal. It represented security, control, power. If they could convince me to hand over the house, they believed everything else would follow. What they didn't realize was that my late husband had always prepared for difficult days. And years before he passed away, he made one decision that neither Ethan nor Vanessa knew anything about. A decision that would completely change everything. The next time they sat me down at the dinner table, they believed they were about to pressure me into giving them exactly what they wanted. Instead, they unknowingly stepped into a plan that had been waiting for years. Part 4. The dinner that changed everything. A few days after our conversation about the house, Vanessa announced that she wanted everyone to have dinner together. "It's been too long since we've all sat down as a family," she said, with a cheerful smile. Something about her voice didn't feel natural. Still, I agreed. I didn't want another argument. That evening, I walked into the dining room and immediately noticed everything had been arranged with unusual care. The table looked beautiful. Fresh flowers stood in the middle. The good dishes were neatly placed. Candles were burning. It looked less like a family dinner and more like an important meeting. Then I noticed we weren't alone. Vanessa had invited her cousin, Melissa, and their neighbor, Daniel. Both greeted me politely, but I couldn't understand why they were there. Family matters usually stayed inside the family. Apparently, not this one. As we ate, the conversation stayed light. They talked about the weather, television shows, and vacations. No one mentioned money. No one mentioned the house. For a moment, I started believing I had worried for nothing. Then dinner ended. Vanessa slowly placed her fork on the table and folded her hands. Her smile returned. "Now that we've eaten," she said, "there's something important we need to discuss." The room suddenly became quiet. Ethan cleared his throat. "Mom, we all agree that it's time to make some decisions about the future." I looked around the table. Everyone was watching me. Vanessa leaned forward. "You've lived a wonderful life in this home." I nodded politely. "But eventually," she continued, "this house will belong to Ethan." I stayed silent. "So why wait?" she asked. "It would make everyone's life much easier if you handled everything now." I took a slow breath. "I've already made my decision?" Vanessa's smile became smaller. "What decision?" "I'm keeping the house exactly as it is." The room fell silent again. Daniel looked down at his plate. Melissa shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Ethan rubbed his forehead. "Mom," he said, trying to stay calm, "why are you making this so difficult?" I'm not making anything difficult. Then why won't you trust us? I looked at him carefully. Trust isn't proven by signing legal papers. Vanessa let out a quiet laugh. You're acting like we're trying to steal something, I answered honestly. I never said that. You don't have to. Her voice became sharper. It's obvious. For the first time that evening, I noticed the kindness had disappeared from her face. The mask was slipping. Ethan pushed his chair back. Mom, we're trying to build our future. And I truly hope you do. Then help us. I already have. Both of them stared at me. I opened my home to you. I've supported you whenever I could. I've always been here. But there are some things I won't give away. Vanessa crossed her arms. So the house matters more than your family? No. The family matters. That's exactly why I'm protecting it. She shook her head. I don't understand you. I know. Her expression hardened. You're being selfish. The word sounded familiar. I had heard it before. Whenever I refused money, whenever I refused pressure, whenever I refused guilt. Apparently, saying no always made me selfish. Ethan suddenly slammed his hand on the table. The dishes rattled. Mom, his voice echoed through the room. Do you want to tear this family apart? I looked at him quietly. No, but I won't let fear make my decisions. Melissa finally spoke. Maybe older parents should let the next generation take over. She smiled kindly as she said it, but her words felt rehearsed, almost as if she'd been asked to say them. Daniel stayed silent the entire time. He looked uncomfortable, like someone who wished he had never accepted the dinner invitation. Vanessa reached into a folder beside her chair. She placed several papers on the table and gently pushed them toward me. There. Everything is ready. You only need one signature. I looked at the documents but didn't touch them. Instead, I looked at Ethan. When did you prepare these? He hesitated. A few days ago? So, before asking me, before hearing my answer. They had already assumed I would agree, or perhaps they believed they could pressure me until I did. Vanessa pointed at the bottom of the page. Just sign. It doesn't have to be complicated. I slowly closed the folder and pushed it back toward her. I'm not signing anything tonight. Her smile disappeared completely. So that's your final answer? I nodded once. Yes. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The silence felt heavier than any argument. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of getting angry, Ethan relaxed. He leaned back in his chair and smiled. That's okay. His calm reaction surprised me. We're not in a hurry, he said. You'll change your mind. Vanessa smiled too, a quiet, confident smile. The kind people wear when they believe they already know how the story ends. I didn't understand why they suddenly looked so pleased. Not until later that night. As I walked past their bedroom, I heard Vanessa whisper something through the half-closed door. If she won't sign willingly, she paused, we'll make sure she doesn't have another choice. I froze. Every instinct told me to walk away, but those few words were enough. The dinner hadn't been their final attempt. It had only been the beginning. And for the first time, I realized they weren't simply asking for my house anymore. They were making plans to take control of my entire life. The next morning, they placed another set of papers in front of me. But hidden behind those harmless-looking pages was a plan so cruel that it finally showed me exactly who my son and his wife had become. I barely slept that night. Vanessa's words kept repeating in my mind. If she won't sign willingly, we'll make sure she doesn't have another choice. I wanted to believe I had misunderstood. Maybe she was angry. Maybe she didn't mean it. But deep inside, I knew exactly what I had heard. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual and made myself a cup of coffee. The house was quiet. For a few peaceful minutes, everything felt normal again. Then I heard footsteps. Ethan walked into the kitchen wearing a business shirt, carrying a black folder under one arm. Vanessa followed him with the same confident smile she always wore whenever she believed she was about to win. Without saying good morning, Ethan placed the folder on the kitchen table. "We should get this done before I leave for work," he said. He opened the folder and slid a document toward me. "There. Just sign." I looked at the first page. The language sounded harmless. Words like temporary authority, financial convenience, and shared responsibility filled the document. To someone who didn't know better, it probably looked completely normal. But I had learned something over the years. The most dangerous papers rarely looked dangerous. They were written to sound comforting. I kept reading. Ethan tapped the table impatiently. "It's only paperwork, Mom. You don't even have to read every page." That sentence alone made me read even more carefully. Vanessa folded her arms. "We're trying to help you." I looked up. "Help me do what?" "So we can manage things if something happens." I smiled politely. "What exactly is something?" Neither of them answered immediately. Finally, Ethan sighed. "You're getting older. There may come a time when decisions become difficult." There it was. Older. The word had quietly entered every conversation, not as a fact, as a weapon. Vanessa stepped closer. "If you trust us, none of this should bother you." I closed the folder. "I'll have my lawyer review it." The smile disappeared from Ethan's face. Why does everything have to involve lawyers? Because important decisions deserve careful thinking. His patience finally broke. "Mom." "This is getting ridiculous." Vanessa looked directly at me. "If you keep refusing to cooperate..." She paused before finishing her sentence. "You may have to find somewhere else to live." The kitchen suddenly felt much colder. I stared at both of them. "Did you just ask me to leave my own home?" Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he looked away. That silence hurt more than any words. Vanessa answered for him. "No one wants that. But we also can't keep living like this." "Keep living like this?" I almost laughed. They had been living in my home for months, eating at my table, using my electricity, parking their cars in my driveway. And somehow, I had become the inconvenience. I stood up slowly and carried my coffee to the window. Outside, the flowers my husband had planted years ago were beginning to bloom. He used to tell me something whenever life became difficult. "Don't make important decisions while you're upset." I remembered those words clearly, so instead of arguing, I took a slow breath. "I need one day." Ethan frowned. "One day for what?" "To think." His voice became sharp. "What is there to think about?" Vanessa answered before I could. "She's trying to delay everything." I turned around calmly. "No. I'm trying to make the right decision." Ethan looked at his watch. "I don't have time for this." His tone sounded impatient. The same way people speak to strangers who are slowing them down. Not the way a son speaks to his mother. Finally, he grabbed the folder. "You have until tomorrow morning." Then he looked me straight in the eyes. "And don't test our patience." Those words stayed with me long after they walked out of the kitchen. Don't test our patience. It wasn't a request anymore. It was a warning. The house felt strangely quiet after they left. I finished my coffee, then slowly walked to my bedroom. Most people would have packed a suitcase. I didn't. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer of my dresser. Hidden beneath old blankets was a small wooden box. Very few people even knew it existed. Inside were documents my husband had carefully organized years before he passed away. Property records, bank papers, insurance files, and one sealed envelope with my name written in his handwriting. He had handed it to me shortly before he died. "This stays sealed," he had said. "Only open it if someone ever tries to force you out of your own home." At the time, I thought he was worrying too much. Our family was close, or at least I believed it was. Now, as I held that envelope in my hands, I realized something that sent chills through me. Maybe he had seen signs long before I did. I carefully placed the envelope beside the other papers. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about saving my relationship with Ethan. I was thinking about protecting myself. That wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was survival. As evening arrived, I quietly packed one small suitcase. Not because I planned to run away, because I had finally accepted something I had been refusing to believe. The people living under my roof no longer saw me as family. To them, I had become an obstacle. And obstacles, sooner or later, are removed. I wasn't going to wait for them to decide when that day would come. That night, while Ethan and Vanessa slept peacefully upstairs, I quietly opened the envelope my husband had trusted me with. Inside was a secret that would turn their entire plan against them. And by sunrise, nothing would ever be the same again. That night, I waited until the whole house was quiet. The lights upstairs went out one by one. The television stopped playing. Even the sound of footsteps disappeared. I carried the small wooden box to the kitchen table and sat down alone. For several minutes, I simply looked at the sealed envelope. My husband's handwriting was still as neat as I remembered. Just seeing it made my chest feel heavy. I gently ran my fingers across my name before opening it. Inside was a letter. Under the letter were several legal documents that I had completely forgotten about. I unfolded the letter first. It began with only a few words. "My dear Margaret, if you're reading this, then something has gone terribly wrong." Tears filled my eyes. It felt like hearing his voice again after all these years. I kept reading. "I hope this envelope is never needed, but life has taught me that money can change people, even the people we love the most. If anyone ever tries to pressure you into giving away this house, don't argue with them. Don't beg. Don't try to change their minds. Simply follow the plan we made together." I took a deep breath. Then I looked at the documents underneath. Everything suddenly became clear. Years before he passed away, my husband had quietly placed the house inside a legal trust. At the time, he had explained the paperwork, but I never imagined it would matter one day. Now I understood why he had insisted on it. The trust contained very clear instructions. No one could force me to sign over the property. No one could pressure me into giving away ownership. And if anyone attempted to threaten, manipulate, or remove me from my own home for financial gain, special protections would automatically take effect. I carefully read every page. The more I read, the calmer I became. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't a trap. It was protection. My husband hadn't expected our family to fall apart. He had simply wanted to make sure I would never be left helpless if it did. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel afraid. I felt prepared. The next morning, I didn't mention the envelope. I acted exactly the way Ethan and Vanessa expected me to. Quiet, calm, almost defeated. When they came downstairs, Ethan looked at me. "Have you made your decision?" I nodded slowly. "I have." A small smile appeared on Vanessa's face. "I knew you would." "I'll sign the papers," I said softly. "But first, I'd like to speak with our family lawyer one last time." Ethan looked annoyed. "Again?" "It's the last step I need." Vanessa quickly answered before he could refuse. "Fine." Her confidence surprised me. She truly believed the outcome was already decided. She had no idea that I wasn't going to see their lawyer. I was going to meet the lawyer my husband had trusted for more than 20 years. That afternoon, I quietly left the house carrying only my handbag and the sealed documents. Neither Ethan nor Vanessa offered to come with me. They believed I was finally giving in. The lawyer's office hadn't changed much over the years. The same wooden desk, the same shelves filled with old books, even the same clock hung on the wall. When he saw me walk inside, he stood up immediately. "Margaret," he said warmly. "It's been a long time." I smiled. "It certainly has." He noticed the envelope in my hands. His expression became serious. "So, it finally happened?" I nodded. "They're trying to force me out." He didn't seem surprised. Instead, he slowly opened the file and began reading through the documents. Every few minutes, he nodded quietly. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "Your husband planned very carefully." "I know. And he was right to do so." I lowered my eyes. "I never thought we'd need any of this." "Most people hope they never will." He then asked me a few simple questions. Had they asked for money? Yes. Had they asked me to sign legal papers? Yes. Had they threatened to remove me from the house? I quietly told him everything. The dinner, the arguments, the papers, Vanessa's warning, even the conversation I had overheard outside their bedroom. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he folded his hands together. "They've already crossed several legal lines." I felt my stomach tighten. "So, what happens now?" He smiled gently. "Now we follow your husband's instructions." He reached for another folder from his cabinet. Inside were additional documents connected to the trust. I watched as he carefully compared everything. Then he looked at me with complete confidence. "You don't need to fight them. You don't need to argue. You don't even need to prove your innocence." I frowned. "Why not?" "Because they have already created the evidence themselves." I didn't understand. He turned the papers toward me. Every threatening text message Ethan had sent, the emails about transferring ownership, the draft agreements, even the request to change authority over the property. Everything could be used to show a clear pattern of pressure. They had been documenting their own actions without realizing it. For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to breathe normally. The lawyer closed the file. "I'll begin the legal process today." I stood up slowly. "Should I tell Ethan?" He shook his head. "No. Go somewhere safe. Let the paperwork speak for itself." As I walked out of the office, I looked back at the building one last time. The fear that had followed me for weeks was finally beginning to disappear. Not because the problem was over, but because I finally knew I wasn't facing it alone. Meanwhile, back at the house, Ethan and Vanessa were still celebrating. They believed I would return carrying signed papers. Instead, I was carrying something far more powerful, the truth. And within the next 24 hours, their confidence would completely fall apart. When Ethan opened his mailbox the following morning, he expected confirmation that the house would soon belong to him. Instead, he received a legal notice that changed his future forever. The next morning, I didn't go back to the house. Instead, I checked into a small motel on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy. The room had plain white walls, a small bed, and one window that looked out onto an empty parking lot. But for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long while. Peace. No one was waiting outside my bedroom door. No one was asking me for money. No one was trying to pressure me into signing papers. I placed my suitcase beside the bed and set my husband's letter on the nightstand. His words had given me more strength than he could have ever imagined. As I made myself a cup of coffee, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. I let it ring. A few seconds later, another call came, then another. Finally, a text message appeared. "Where are you?" I didn't answer. Another message arrived almost immediately. "Mom, this isn't funny. Come home." I looked at the screen for a moment before locking my phone again. For the first time, I wasn't ignoring him because I was angry. I was choosing silence because there was nothing left to explain. About an hour later, another message appeared. This one was from Vanessa. "You can't avoid this forever." A few minutes later came another. "The lawyer still needs your signature." I quietly smiled. They still believed I was working with their plan. They had no idea that everything had already changed. Around noon, my lawyer called. "They've received the first legal notice." I sat up straight. "What happened?" There was exactly the reaction I expected. He paused for a second. "Your son called my office several times." "And?" "He wanted to know why the property couldn't be transferred." I closed my eyes. "What did you tell him?" "The truth." My lawyer's voice stayed calm. "I explained that the house is protected under the trust your husband created years ago." I listened carefully. He didn't take the news very well. I wasn't surprised. "What about Vanessa?" There was a brief silence. She became angry. I expected that too. My lawyer gave a quiet laugh. She insisted there had been some mistake. But there wasn't. Everything had been prepared legally years before. Every document had been signed. Every condition had been recorded. There was nothing they could argue against. That afternoon, my phone started ringing again. This time, I answered. "Mom!" Ethan's voice sounded completely different. The confidence was gone. "What is all this? What do you mean?" "The lawyer says we can't do anything with the house." "I know. But why?" I took a slow breath. "Because your father planned ahead." There was silence. Then he spoke again. "You never told me." "You never asked." He sounded frustrated. "We thought—" I gently interrupted him. "I know what you thought." He stayed quiet. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked something I never expected. "Did you really think I'd take your house?" The question broke my heart. Not because of what he asked, because of everything that had already happened. I answered honestly. "I didn't think that years ago. But after everything that's happened, I had no choice but to protect myself." He didn't deny anything. Instead, he sighed. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "No?" I asked softly. "Then how was it supposed to happen?" He didn't answer, because there wasn't a good answer. A few seconds later, I heard Vanessa speaking in the background. She sounded angry. "Ask her where she is. Tell her she can't do this. Put me on the phone." Ethan lowered his voice. "She wants to talk to you." "I'm not ready." He hesitated. "Mom?" "Yes?" "When are you coming home?" I looked around the quiet motel room. The answer came easily. "I don't know." After ending the call, I sat quietly beside the window. Outside, people were going about their normal day. Cars passed by. Children laughed in the distance. Life continued. It reminded me of something important. The world doesn't stop because our hearts are hurting. It keeps moving. And eventually, so do we. Later that evening, my lawyer called once more. "I have another update." I listened carefully. "The trust contains one more condition." I frowned. "What condition?" "If someone tries to pressure you into giving away your home through threats or manipulation." He paused. "They automatically lose every personal benefit connected to the estate." I blinked. "What does that include?" "The emergency savings your husband left. The classic car in the garage. The investment account. And every financial benefit that was meant to be passed down." I sat there speechless. My husband hadn't done this to punish anyone. He had done it to make sure kindness could never be mistaken for weakness. That evening, Ethan called again. This time his voice was shaking. "Mom, they're saying we could lose everything." I closed my eyes, not out of anger, out of sadness. "You didn't lose everything today, Ethan. You started losing it the day you believed your own mother was something you could control." Another long silence filled the call. Then he quietly whispered, "I'm sorry." For just a second, I remembered the little boy who used to run into my arms after school. The boy who believed I could fix anything. But some things cannot be repaired with one apology. Some bridges are damaged one stone at a time, and rebuilding them takes much longer than breaking them. "I hope one day you truly understand what happened," I said gently. Then I ended the call. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time since all of this began. Not because I had won, but because I had finally stopped fighting for the approval of people who had forgotten how to love with respect. I knew there was still one final chapter left. The legal process wasn't over, neither was Ethan's story. But soon, both he and Vanessa would face the full consequences of the choices they had made. And when they finally stood in front of the house they believed would become theirs, they would discover that it no longer belonged to anyone in the family. The final surprise my husband had planned years earlier was about to be revealed, and when Ethan and Vanessa learned who the true owner of the house would be, their entire world collapsed. The next 2 days passed quietly. I stayed at the small motel, trying to clear my mind. I wasn't hiding. I was giving myself something I hadn't had in a very long time: space. Every morning, I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the sunrise. The silence didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt peaceful. Meanwhile, Ethan and Vanessa were doing everything they could to stop what had already begun. They called my lawyer, they sent emails, they even asked relatives to contact me. One by one, my phone filled with missed calls. Some family members asked me to be reasonable. Others said I should forgive Ethan because he's still your son. Very few people asked what had actually happened. Most of them only knew Ethan's version of the story. I didn't argue with anyone. I simply let the truth take its own course. On the third morning, my lawyer called again. The foundation has accepted the transfer. I sat quietly for a moment. So, it's official? Yes. The house is no longer part of your family's inheritance. I looked out the window. It was strange. The home where I had spent most of my life no longer belonged to me. Yet somehow I didn't feel empty. I felt relieved. The house had become a place filled with pain. Now it had the chance to become something meaningful again. My husband had chosen a foundation that helped older women who had been financially abused or forced out of their homes. He always believed that if something good could no longer stay in the family, it should help someone who truly needed it. Now his wish was becoming reality. Later that afternoon, 2 representatives from the foundation visited the property. They arrived with folders, identification cards, and official documents. Everything was handled professionally. There was no shouting, no threats, no arguments, only facts. When Ethan opened the front door, he immediately knew something was wrong. One representative politely introduced herself. "Good afternoon. We're here regarding the property." Ethan frowned. There must be some mistake. "I'm afraid there isn't." She calmly handed him the documents. He read the first page, then the second. His face slowly lost all color. This can't be right." The representative remained calm. "The ownership transfer has already taken effect according to the legal trust." Vanessa stepped forward and grabbed the papers from his hands. She read them quickly, then her voice grew louder. "This is ridiculous. Someone tricked us." "No one tricked you," the representative answered kindly. Everything followed the legal instructions that were prepared years ago. Vanessa looked around the room as if expecting someone to tell her this was all a joke. But nobody did. She turned toward Ethan. "Do something." He stood frozen. For the first time since all of this began, he had no answer. The representative continued speaking. "You'll receive written instructions explaining the next steps. You'll also be given enough time to make arrangements before leaving the property." Vanessa couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You can't make us leave." "We've been living here," the representative nodded politely. "I understand this is difficult, but the ownership has legally changed. There is nothing further to discuss." With that, they handed over one final envelope and quietly left. No raised voices, no dramatic scene, just the truth. That evening, Ethan called me again. This time, I answered after the second ring. His voice sounded tired, not angry, not demanding, just tired. "Mom, yes? They came today." "I know. They said the house belongs to the foundation now." "That's correct." He stayed silent. Then he quietly asked, "Did Dad really arrange all of this?" "He did." "Why?" I looked down at my husband's letter, because he wanted to make sure I would never be forced to choose between fear and dignity. Another long silence followed. Finally, Ethan spoke. "I never thought things would end this way." I answered honestly. "Neither did I." He took a slow breath. "I thought you were just being stubborn." "I wasn't. I was protecting what your father and I built together." He didn't interrupt. For the first time in a long while, he simply listened. "I'm not angry because you asked for help," I continued. "I'm hurt because you believed you could threaten me when I said no." His voice cracked. "I know. I made a terrible mistake." I closed my eyes. I hope one day you understand that respect isn't something parents earn by giving away everything they own. It's something children should never take away. He quietly whispered, "I'm sorry." This time, the apology sounded real. But some wounds don't disappear overnight. Trust isn't rebuilt in a single conversation. It grows slowly, just like it breaks slowly. After we ended the call, I placed my phone on the table and looked around the motel room. Soon, I would leave this place too, not to return to the old house. That chapter had ended. Instead, I would begin somewhere new, somewhere peaceful, somewhere I could live without fear. As for Ethan and Vanessa, life had finally taught them the lesson I never could, that love is a gift, not an obligation, and that greed often costs far more than it ever gains. I thought losing the house would be Ethan's greatest regret, but I was wrong. A few weeks later, he showed up at my new apartment with something in his hands that changed our final conversation forever. 3 weeks passed before I heard from Ethan again. During those weeks, I moved into a small apartment on the east side of town. It wasn't large. It didn't have a beautiful garden like my old house. There was no wide front porch where my husband and I used to drink coffee every Sunday morning. But it had something I had been missing for a long time: peace. Every morning, sunlight filled my living room through the large windows. I bought a few simple plants for the balcony. I hung family pictures on the walls. Not because I wanted to hold on to the past, but because those memories still belonged to me. I placed my husband's old watch on the bedside table. Every time I looked at it, I remembered his quiet wisdom. He never believed that strength came from raising your voice. He believed real strength came from staying calm when life became difficult. Slowly, I began creating a new routine. I read books. I took short walks around the neighborhood. I smiled at neighbors I had never met before. Some afternoons, I sat in the nearby park and watched children play. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, and that was enough. One Saturday afternoon, someone knocked on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I froze. Ethan was standing there. He looked different. His clothes were neat, but he seemed exhausted. Dark circles rested under his eyes. His shoulders were no longer straight with confidence. Instead, they looked heavy, as if he had been carrying a burden for weeks. Neither of us spoke at first. Then he quietly said, "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. He walked into the apartment and slowly looked around. "It's nice," he said. I smiled politely. "It feels like home." He nodded. "I'm glad." For a few moments, silence filled the room. Then I noticed he was holding a small cardboard box. He carefully placed it on the coffee table. "I found these while packing." I looked inside. My heart immediately tightened. There were old family photographs, my husband's reading glasses, a small music box we had bought during our first vacation together. Even Ethan's childhood drawings were neatly stacked inside. I picked up one faded picture. It showed Ethan at 6 years old, covered in birthday cake and smiling from ear to ear. Without thinking, I smiled. "He insisted on blowing out the candles twice," I whispered. Ethan gave a small laugh. "I remember." For the first time in months, our conversation didn't feel like a battle. It felt like two people remembering the same happy life. After a long silence, Ethan spoke again. "I've been thinking a lot." I waited. I kept asking myself when everything changed. He looked down at his hands. I wanted to blame Vanessa. He paused. "But I can't." I remained quiet. I made my own choices. Those words mattered, not because they erased the past, but because they showed he was finally accepting responsibility. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. I stopped seeing you as my mother. I started seeing you as a problem I needed to solve. His voice shook. I don't know how I became that person. I slowly reached for one of the photographs. It didn't happen overnight. He nodded. I know. I ignored every warning. I believed every excuse. And every time you said no, he looked away. I convinced myself you didn't love me. I gently shook my head. A parent's love doesn't disappear because they set boundaries. He quietly wiped his eyes. I understand that now. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The room stayed peaceful. There was no anger, no accusations, only honesty. Finally, Ethan reached into his jacket pocket. I brought something else. He carefully unfolded a piece of paper. It wasn't a legal document. It wasn't another request. It was a handwritten letter. I wasn't sure I'd have the courage to say everything out loud, he admitted. So I wrote it instead. He handed it to me. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the page. The first sentence immediately brought tears to my eyes. Mom, I spent so much time trying to inherit your house that I almost lost the person who made it a home. I kept reading. Every line felt honest. There were no excuses, no blame, no attempts to justify what had happened, only regret. When I finished, I carefully folded the letter and placed it beside me. I don't expect forgiveness, Ethan said softly. I only wanted you to know that I finally understand. I looked at him for a long moment, then I answered with complete honesty. Understanding is the first step. But trust, I paused, takes much longer. He nodded without arguing. I know. As he stood to leave, he stopped at the doorway. I've filed for divorce. I looked up in surprise. He continued quietly. I realized I kept blaming other people for choices that I made myself. He gave a small, sad smile. I need to learn how to be responsible before I ask anyone to trust me again. Then he walked away. I stood at the window watching him leave. He looked older than the last time I had seen him, not because of age, because life had finally taught him the lessons that comfort never could. As I closed the door, I looked back at the old family photographs on my table. Some memories still hurt, others still made me smile. But for the first time, none of them controlled me anymore. I thought that would be the last time I ever saw Ethan. But a few months later, one unexpected invitation brought our family together one final time, and what happened there gave this story an ending I never imagined. Nearly 6 months passed after Ethan visited my apartment. Life settled into a quiet routine. I had stopped counting the days since I left the old house. Instead, I focused on the days that were still ahead of me. My apartment slowly became a true home. Fresh flowers sat on the kitchen table. The books I loved filled the shelves. Every evening, I opened the balcony door and let the cool breeze fill the room. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for an argument. I wasn't afraid of hearing raised voices. I had learned something important. Peace is not found in a place. It is found in the people you allow into your life. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. The envelope had Ethan's handwriting on it. For a moment, I simply stared at it. Then I carefully opened it. Inside was a small invitation. Mom, I'm volunteering at the community center this Saturday. The foundation that received Dad's house is opening a new support program for older women. It would mean a lot if you came. There's no pressure. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to become a better man. I read the note twice. It wasn't asking for money. It wasn't asking for forgiveness. It was simply an invitation. I thought about it for several days. Finally, on Saturday morning, I decided to go. The community center was full of people. Some were volunteers. Others were women who had come looking for help after difficult experiences. There were warm smiles everywhere. Conversations filled the room. No one knew my story. To them, I was simply another guest. As I walked inside, I noticed a familiar face across the room. Ethan. He was arranging chairs and carrying boxes with several other volunteers. When he saw me, he stopped. For a second, we simply looked at each other. Then he smiled.